What's the promise of Trump as far as Bitcoin and digital assets that's making everyone so bullish right now?
Well, I think Trump's just the first Bitcoin president, right? To come out and explicitly say, hey, I like Bitcoin, I own Bitcoin, I'm going to protect Bitcoin, I'm going to protect your right to hold Bitcoin. I think 2025 will continue to be a great year for Bitcoin. And mainly it's two things, right? One, you're going to continue to get printing of money, both in the United States and globally. And then two is you have a Federal Reserve that is cutting interest rates. And as that M2 money supply grows and interest rates go down, you get cheap capital coming into the market.
Do we know who Satoshi is? Do you think, you talk to a lot of people in these circles, is it like a tightly held secret? Is it better that we don't know who Satoshi is? Where do you land on that whole thing?
I think it's much better that we don't know who Satoshi is, right? If we knew who Satoshi was, everyone would want to know what their politics are, where they grew up, what's their story, what was their reasoning. Every time something happens, they would want to interview them. It would be kind of an attack surface to Bitcoin that we're better off not having. And so whether Satoshi is alive or not, whether it's a person or a group, whether it's a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, Bitcoin is judged on the merit of the network, on the merit of the software, on the merit of its usefulness in the world. And that is just a much better kind of environment for Bitcoin to exist, rather than us trying to, kind of project whoever the person is and their views and their kind of outlook on life onto a piece of technology.
Michael Saylor, Microstrategy. Give me the 5-second version of that. My understanding of it is basically he has a software company. The stock was flat for 30 years. He became a Bitcoin treasury company. Basically, he issues stock and uses the company's cash flows to buy Bitcoin with the intent of essentially becoming a Bitcoin financial service operation at some point in the future. But in the meantime, he's just stacking at like the level of a nation state. Is that the general gist of what he's doing? And then there's a multiplier effect on that over the accumulation in price of Bitcoin that he holds, you know, right?
If you think that Bitcoin is the first technology that I'm aware of that has reached kind of global mass adoption that started from the bottom and went up. Most technologies start with militaries and nation states, they then go to companies, and then only at the end are individuals. So you can think of computers, there was big mainframe computers, then eventually everyone got a kind of computer on their desk. If you think of phones, same thing, right? You kind of went from nation states all the way down, now we all have cell phones in our pocket. Bitcoin's been the opposite. It's the individuals adopted it first. And so if it was good for the individuals, then it definitely was going to be good for the companies. If it's good for the companies, it's going to be good for the countries. Now, what MicroStrategy has figured out is what is the game of Bitcoin? There's only 21 million that will ever be in existence. So the game of Bitcoin is accumulate as much Bitcoin as you can. And so what he has figured out is how to use the levers of capital markets and debt and equity to drive as much capital into his business, and then he uses that capital to buy more Bitcoin. Now, as he buys that Bitcoin, he's doing it with such conviction that it is at a size and a speed that we just haven't seen before. And so today he has over 400,000 Bitcoin that sit inside that company. But what's interesting is the shareholders own that Bitcoin, right? The company is made up of shareholders, and so obviously they've been doing very well. Now, what I do think is pretty interesting is that there is this kind of premium. And so if we use round numbers and say that they have $30 billion of Bitcoin, but the stock is trading at $100 billion, people say, hey, wait a second, this is a big issue.
Right, everyone tries to short it. They think they're being too smart. Right.
But what ultimately is happening is people are giving him credit that he's going to continue to be able to raise capital and buy more. And so it's almost like they're giving him some sort of like revenue multiple on the business. Now, the question is, what's the right multiple? Nobody knows. And so that's where all the debate and the controversy comes in, is should it be near zero multiple or should it be like 10 times multiple? We just don't know because no one's ever done this before. And so whenever we see something that's new, a lot of people get excited and they think there's a lot of opportunity. But whenever something's new also, there's plenty of people who say, hey, nothing is new in finance and be very careful because there's a lot of risk. And both of them are probably true. It is exciting and there is risk. And so just understand what's going on if you're going to try to go dabble in it.
He's been a genius and a fool depending on where the Bitcoin price is, basically.
Correct.
It's all or nothing for him. Now, it's interesting, too. We talk about we're at 100K right now, which is a huge milestone. What actually seems crazier to me in hindsight is that we got to 67K the last cycle without BlackRock, without ETFs, without institutional money. It was all retail. So to me, that's the most bullish sort of thing looking forward. We just have all of these fire hoses of money that didn't exist 4 years ago, now totally turned on, and more so by the day.
Yeah, and Bitcoin is very unique in that it's one of the only assets I'm aware of that as the price goes higher, it becomes less risky. Right? If you go back and you look at it, when Bitcoin was at $1,000, there was plenty of these large capital pools that said, this thing's new, this thing is too small. I need to put tens of billions of dollars into an investment. I can't do it with this. It's too risky. Now, as Bitcoin has gotten bigger and it's gotten to $2 trillion market cap, now all of a sudden everyone's like, wait a second. I can put money in it. It's de-risked. This is an opportunity for me. And so as the price continues to go higher, more of these large pools of capital will come in. As large pools of capital come in to buy a finite supply asset, the price should continue to go up. And so you have this kind of reflexive element to it that is just usually not available, because in a company, if a company saw this much demand coming in, they would just issue more shares.
Right.
But the fact that it's just a finite supply of only 21 million, no one's going to issue more Bitcoin, and therefore that just means price is kind of the variable that has to change in order to accommodate it.
Right, if gold went to 10 grand an ounce, we'd find a lot more gold real fast, right?
People would be digging real fast.
Yeah, no, for sure, that's for sure. Volatility, that is the secret sauce that gets you the gains. With BlackRock, the ETFs, Michael Saylor says this a lot, that it's gonna smooth out, right? Where it's not gonna shoot up as high, but it's not gonna have these like 80% drawdowns too that give everyone a heart attack. Is that your perception of how we move forward?
Anytime you have something that starts out as very small and becomes bigger, you would expect that that is the equivalent of it going from a very contrarian idea to a consensus idea. It's gaining adoption, right? More and more people are interested in it. Well, as we know from financial assets, the more people that hold something, the less volatility there is, right? If you wanted to have a really volatile stock, you basically would only float 2% of the supply and you would hold the rest, and then there would be tons of volatility. And so ultimately, Bitcoin is becoming a more decentralized ownership base. There's kind of different players that are coming into the market. You can see over the last 10 years that volatility has been coming down, and you shouldn't expect a $2 trillion asset to operate with the same volatility as a $2 billion asset. Right. And so I always say that you get paid for the risk you take. Buying Bitcoin in 2024 is much less risky than it was in 2014. And so naturally you should expect to get a lower return, but that lower return historically has still been better than the stock market. And so it's all relative kind of comparisons, but Bitcoin seems to be something that people are really interested in.
Now, let's talk a little bit about proper storage, because I think, this is one of the things that can be confusing. Do you leave it on the exchange? Do you put it in cold storage, which has its own amount of risk and potential for user error? What's your message to people who are hearing these things? They don't really know what cold storage is. What do you do to make sure you don't lose what you have?
Yeah, there's really two value propositions from Bitcoin's perspective, right? There's kind of a price component, which really allows for people to benefit from, protection of that debasement of the currency. And so if you have price exposure, that's put you in a pretty good position. But there's also this element of self-custody, kind of self-sovereignty, where no different than taking cash out of an ATM, you can take your Bitcoin, kind of hold on to it. If you have a lot of cash sitting in your house, there's risk to that, right? And there's a reason why. There's bank accounts and things like that. In Bitcoin, it's very similar. There's many different custody options that you have. You can do things like buy the ETF and get exposure to the price. You don't have to worry about holding the Bitcoin. You can buy Bitcoin, you can put it into some sort of custody solution online, whether it's with Coinbase or Gemini or one of the large players, or you can actually take self-custody of the Bitcoin. The ultimate goal for a lot of people, I think, is, hey, how do I get comfortable taking self-custody? I want to benefit from not just price, but I also want to benefit from that custody component. What I always tell people, though, is make sure you know what you're doing. Yeah. Right? Go spend the time, the energy, and if you're buying your first Bitcoin or half a Bitcoin or a tenth of a Bitcoin and you think that you're an expert in custody, slow down. Right? Make sure that you really know what you're doing, and maybe start with, why don't I take custody of $5 of Bitcoin and make sure that I can actually go and retrieve it? Can I move it between wallets? How do I use this technology? And it's no different than, when you first got the internet, you didn't go and just try to spend your entire credit card on the internet. You started with like, I don't know if this really works, right? Let's just maybe start with a $5 transaction.
Yeah, you send it to the wrong route, you are out of luck.
Yeah, and so I think just understanding that this is no different. Like, you have to make sure that you're educated is really important. And so, yes, you want to learn about self-custody, you ultimately want to be able to do it, but take the time and energy to practice and kind of build up the confidence in order to be able to go there.
There's a lot of people obviously talking all sorts of nonsense on social media, YouTube, whatnot. What is your advice for, sifting through the people who are just pumping their own bags versus good faith people who are trying to educate the public?
Yeah, one of the benefits of being like terminally online is that you get really good at critical thinking. Because if you just believe everything that you read on the internet, like, you're screwed, right? You'll just go crazy. And so I do think that maybe the younger generation is getting better and better at this, but if for anyone, it's really, really important to go do your own research. And so one of the things I harp on to our team all the time is they will tell me something that they read somewhere, and I say, did you read the source material? right?
Right.
You saw an article about something, or you saw somebody tweet something. Did you go and actually see, is it true? And in politics, it always is surprising. Both sides will say things, you'll learn something different. You're like, oh, okay, well maybe I should make sure I'm always checking. Finance is no different. And so if you read something about Bitcoin, make sure you go and see where exactly is that confirmed. And a great way to do it on the internet is to triangulate and see that it is being reported by the mainstream media, voices on Twitter, maybe somebody in the Bitcoin world that's not on the internet, et cetera. And so you can kind of start to realize, like, okay, this is like a consensus-driven viewpoint that is really coming from people who usually actually don't agree. That's a great way to find truth, is when you find these different groups of people who are saying, hey, we all think X is true, then odds are that's probably a pretty good spot to look.
Yeah, right. You have to sort of AI generate. That's why I consume so much, and then I sort of start to figure out, like, is that real or is that not real?
And I think you also start to understand in kind of a weird way, what are people's motives, right? There are some people that you may read on the internet who that they're doing things like engagement farming, and they're trying just to say anything to get people a reaction. There's other people who you can tell they're very careful. They want to make sure that they have a high degree of trust with others on the internet, and they're very methodical about what they say, when they say it, how they say it. They're citing sources, all that type of stuff. And so it's just kind of like use common sense. That used to be easier to say than maybe you can today.
Right.
But I do think that just critical thinking, go look for the source material, and that should help you get much closer to the truth.